This video demonstration shows arthroscopic assisted acromioclavicular joint stabilization using a tensionable suture button construct. The authors have the following disclosures. The patient is positioned in a beach chair position and the arm is draped free. A standard posterior viewing portal is used. A spinal needle is placed parallel to the subscapularis for creation of the anterolateral portal. Initial exposure of the coracoid body is performed by viewing from the posterior portal and working from the AL portal with the radio frequency wand. The exposure of the rest of the coracoid base can be performed working with the RF from the anterior portal. Once the coracoid is adequately exposed, a longitudinal incision is made over the distal clavicle. The authors prefer an open exposure to allow for improved reduction. The medial and lateral aspect of the coracoid is determined with a spinal needle. Independent drilling of the coracoid is performed using an ACL tibial jig introduced from the anterior portal. The ACL jig is set at 60 degrees and the bullet trocar is positioned centrally on the top of the coracoid with the tip aimer at the base of the coracoid. It is important to recheck the medial and lateral aspect of the coracoid prior to drilling to ensure central drilling and avoid iatrogenic fractures. Once drilled through, a looped wire is passed through the drill hole. Retrograde shuttling of the glenoid bone loss button system is performed from the anterior portal. It is imperative to ensure that the button peg sits firmly into the drill hole at the base of the coracoid. A switching stick is then inserted medial to the coracoid. This passage is enlarged with a cannular dilator. A loop suture is passed through the dilator and one end of two tapes is passed medially. This same procedure is repeated for the lateral aspect to ensure that two tapes pass under the coracoid. If a graft is desired, it can also be passed in this same fashion. Once the button system, tapes, and graft are passed under the coracoid, attention is turned to the distal clavicle. Based on X-ray measurements of the unaffected side, 2 mm drill holes are drilled at the medial and lateral aspect of the coracoid, with an additional drill hole in the middle. The JBL button system is passed into the center hole, while each end of the tapes are passed into the medial and lateral holes. One end of the graft can be passed under the clavicle. A tensioner is then used to cinch down the button on the top of the clavicle at 80 newtons. The knot is then tied to secure the tension. The ends of the tape are subsequently tied. The graft is secured in a standard figure of 8 configuration with sutures. Finally, 2 mm drill holes are drilled from an anterior to posterior direction on the distal clavicle and acromion. A single tape is passed through them in a figure of 8 configuration and the ends of the tape are tied on a button anterior to the distal clavicle. The wound is then closed in layers, taking care to perform adequate fascial closure. 1 year post-operative X-ray shows stable reduction with no expansion of bony tunnels. Thank you for your attention.